Definitely. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm still trying to get used to how to use Zoom, so I don't know how many people are on the call. But hi everyone. So yeah, I think you really nailed it on the head, I suppose, in the little introduction that you just gave. In terms of like the education sector has been marketized to the point where institutions don't even know where they're at, let alone us trying to figure out where they're at. I guess so. I think before we talk about, I guess, the National Education Service, what it means and like and what it encompasses, I think it's important to recognise that the education system is broken. If it was fundamentally set up on a system that was, I guess, first of all, built to privilege and to increase the prospect and knowledge of a particular core of people, right? It was only a couple of decades ago where universities were exclusive places for white men, right? White middle-class men, right? And that's not that long ago. And I think that's an incredible important thing to realize, that actually our universities look exactly like, in terms of the way they teach and the way in their structures, they really replicate the power structures that exist in society. They've never changed. And so like I remember recently, like it wasn't actually so recent, time seems to be flying by, but it was like a year ago, when I first started my role, I was sat on a panel with some vice chancellors, and it was some UK ministers, and like some of the like the big names in the sector, you'd say, right? And we were talking about, like, I guess, the future of education. And when they talk about the future of education, they talk about technology, right? Like they're talking about AI. And for me, I just did not understand how, like, the rest of the world has moved, right? Like we don't take carriages to go from like London to Leicester, right? We take a train. Like the rest of us have moved on in terms of like thinking about doing things better and more efficiently. But why is education taught in the exact same way? And why are there like binaries of the way in which we see how education should be received? And I think for me it was like, and then also then like linking it to like actually this current system that we have in terms of education, like who succeeds in that system, right? Like actually, of course, it's those people that were set up to succeed in that. And now universities being a place where our institutions want to celebrate the richness of like of people of color attending university, of more people from deprived backgrounds attending university. They want to celebrate that, but actually don't recognize how they've set those people up to fail when they attend those institutions. And so to me, it was like the system itself was broken. And for a long time, I guess, when I was involved in my students' union, when I was vice president, I kind of was like, maybe this is what it needs, and like maybe this changes what it needs, and then maybe that changes what it needs. And it took me a while to really like step back and be like, whoa, the system is broken. It is just completely, it just needs to be burnt down to the ground and rebuilt. And to me, that's what National Education Service did. Like it gave a vision for reimagining education as we know it, right? And it gave me the easy perspective of understanding it in the frame of like the National Health Service, right? Like actually think about for me, thinking about the National Health Service not existing is almost impossible to me, because I've grown up with it and that's all I've ever known. But actually, when you travel around the world, you speak to colleagues and activists who live in countries where there is no health service, right? There is no, and the system and the process in which they have, and it makes me realize it was only because somebody was brave enough to reimagine it altogether that we are where we are today. And like, I'm not obviously talking about that the NHS itself is the glory and the best system in which we have. I mean, it's absolutely not. And it does need a lot of work. But I think it really gives you a framework of thinking that I guess we need to think about education as well, because education, just like a health service, is a human right. It is absolutely pivotal to everything and anything that we do, right? It links to the success of every aspect of our society. So education is a public good, and I think for me it became starting from there and building up. And so when we put together the campaign of and also I guess being a part of like being an student activist and organizing on my campus, to me NUS always campaigned on a million different things, and never really, and like I think has always fundamentally campaigned on tuition fees, has always campaigned on like the Black attainment gap, has always actually like spoken about the issues in terms of like access in the education sector, but I don't think has ever really brought that all together, right? And that's what the NES does. It really just brings all the issues that exist and says, you can't, like, let's not tackle it, like, let's not tinker on the edges, you know, let's rebuild a education system that's fit for the 21st century. And I think that's the bold vision that we need as young people to drive in, because the reality is, we are the ones, and I mean, as tacky as it is, like, we constantly hear politicians say this, they are the future, like, we are the future. And I think it is incredibly important for young people to take lead in that and be comfortable and confident to be able to hold elected members to account, and also, like, think outside of, like, that limited vision that's been set out for us in society. And so the National Education Service, for me, looked at 3 core things. And the first one was accessibility. And for me, education needs to be accessible to anybody and everybody. And of course, that means there shouldn't be a financial barrier. Education is an investment. And I think that I mean, we've always campaigned about NUS, as NUS, about education being free. But I think we need to talk about what free looks like, because universities need to be fully funded. They need to be able to sustain themselves. The reason that the current system has turned into, like, a market and competition of universities is because they've been put into that space, right? And they're now operating in that space. And now we find ourselves, like, what COVID-19 has essentially done, right, is reveal students as essentially consumers, right? Because students are saying, well, we didn't sign up for this, and that's not what it says on the label in which I signed up to. And universities are turning around saying, well, we said you're a customer, but you're not a customer, you're a student, right? And they've changed their mind. And I think, if anything, it's like, this crisis has really shown the cracks and all the failures that we have in our education system. Like, another example is like the universities want to talk about, like, the whole rise of, like, mental health issues among students. But we've been saying for years, the issues that students face on, like, mental health issues isn't it's a crisis, it's an effect of something, right? And so you can't talk about tackling that issue, like putting money into services, when those students are still going through the issues that exist in your systems, right? And I think, if anything, it's really brought that to light, because universities are having to rethink certain parts of their services, and students are being more vocal, because obviously this virus has meant that people have been forced to stay home and have been forced to isolate, and a lot of young people have been put in very difficult positions where they are quite literally not receiving any money, because, you know, they've lost jobs, and at the same time are in this difficult situation where their landlords are making them pay when they've got no forms of income. And actually, people, and, like, ministers forget, and you'd be surprised how many MPs I've spoken to who were surprised when I told them that like, full-time students can't apply for universal credit. Like, that's, to them, they were surprised at that. And so I think, like, it's often like the system kind of like, always through a crisis, we things are times by 10, and it becomes clear finally, even though we've been screaming and shouting about it for years. So I think COVID-19 has somewhat done that. And so for me, like, the first pillar of that campaign is for education to be fully funded and free for all, but also accessible. And when we talk about accessibility, I don't mean, like, the race equity charters that universities are putting in place to tackle racism in their institutions, because that's all that's doing is essentially tinkering around the edges and not really recognizing the real issue in which exists. And the other one is lifelong. Education should be lifelong. We should be, I mean, just because you graduate from university doesn't mean you finish learning, right? And if anything, we know that, like, for example, we're heading into a recession right now, and the only way that we rebuild from a recession is to retrain and relearn and re-educate our workforce to be able to meet the demands that exist coming out of it. And so people are going to have to go back to university. People are going to have to go back to some kind of training provider, and they should be able to do that without a cost and an affiliation themselves, because at the end of the day, it impacts our society, it impacts everything around us. And so, to me, I think those are, like, very core and fundamental pillars of what a national education service is. And I think it really moves away from I guess aligning education to a market where you go to university in order to attain the best jobs and in order to be able to buy a house. And it's this system that's put in place, but actually aligns it to you being able to go to university or college and do something that makes you happy, do something that makes the world around you a better place. And I think that's where we've really moved away from. I think universities have become a place of have really become a place of just churning out these like people that have to put short-term profit over long-term prosperity, just because all they're thinking about throughout the 3 years is the level of debt they're going to be walking out with. And so for me, I think when the only way you change that mentality of like young people coming out of education is that you strip them off that debt, right? You and you allow them to really go to university and study and really think deeply about how they can change the world and how their skills and what they learn in their university can like lead to the world being a better place. And I think that's really what education should be about at its very core. So to me, I think that's what the National Education Service is. That is what it embodies, and it's a 10-year campaign as well. So it's the first time NUS has ever launched a 10-year campaign. And for me, it's just the reality of like, we're not going to have a free, fully funded education system that is accessible and lifelong. And when I say lifelong, I'm talking about like reimagining how university, how a degree works, how like going to university, like, is it going to be 1 year? Is it going to be 2 years? Are you going to be studying in a way in which you build up your courses? I think like the way in which we attain our degrees need to be completely rethought and reimagined. And so I know that's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? Like right now, we're still in the conversation of putting the argument out for education being a public good, right? That's where we're at. So I think it was important for me when I was setting out this campaign to recognize that this is going to be way beyond me. But actually, if we highlight exactly the road in which we're going to get to where we're going to get to, it allows the organization and also all our members and all young people that believe in free and accessible education to really get behind it. So yeah, I think I'm gonna end that there.
Thanks so much. That was great. I think you're completely right as well. And, you know, it's been a chaotic decade in terms of what's been going on with education. But as you said, this crisis, this pandemic has really highlighted those cracks in the system. And I think you made an excellent point around students have been told that the sort of, you know, the sort of carrot to the stick of you know, marketization and having to pay tuition fees is that, well, you have consumer rights, you're a consumer, you paid for your education, so your university has to provide certain things to you, and they advertise a course to you, and that has to be the course that you were then able to study. That goes out the window the minute a crisis like this strikes, you know. And there's students across the country who have not been able to they've not had the experience that they are paying for, essentially, and all of their consumer rights have gone completely out of the window because it's not convenient for universities to be held accountable for that, because it will financially cripple them. So all of that language, all of that, you know, it's all of that veneer of kind of like, well, we're changing it, we're making it better for students, we're giving you more rights as a student, was a complete myth. And students that are signing up, you know, to go to university next year, they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what to expect. And universities, you know, the regulators that make sure that universities are supposed to follow these, you know, laws, these rules, have been told not to inspect them, not to ensure that they follow those rules and regulations, because the financial situation that they're finding themselves in is so precarious, and the government doesn't know what to do about it. So I think you highlighted that brilliantly, and especially, like, you know, in terms of the current situation and what this means in the long term, not just as a result of us going into a recession, but also if you look at things like the climate crisis and the impact that that's going to have on people's jobs and careers, and also just their happiness and health and well-being. Being able to go back to education throughout life is so important for a sort of sustainable, healthy, happy society. It shouldn't just be something that you pay for once and then that was it, you got your sort of like magic pass to a great job. It's something that you should, you know, take advantage of for your entire life. So thanks for that. It was great. We're just going to ask some questions now, if that's all right, Zamzam.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking to us a little bit about what education means to you personally and your loved ones and to wider society? I mean, I think you've touched on that, but it'd be great to hear how and why you're so passionate about this.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess for me, like a little bit, I guess, about my background. I was born in Sweden, but my parents are Somali refugees, and so came to, I guess, Europe during the Civil War. And to them, like, education has always been like the pillar and the key to like I guess, anything. Like, my dad would always say, they can take anything from you, but they can't take your knowledge. And so for me, knowledge was always power. And like, my dad would always, like, I always talk about this. My first ever job was me tutoring these refugee kids that moved to Bolton, and because I had picked up English pretty quickly, and my dad paid me to teach other people's kids, and I just didn't understand why, like, I wouldn't get straight pocket money like from my own father. I had to teach other people's kids. I didn't get it, but he was teaching me like a really valuable lesson, which I really understand now. And it's that for me at that age, I was like 10, 11, but at that age I had knowledge powerful enough to change somebody else's life. And so that's the lesson that my dad really drew into me from a very young age. He was like, God rest his soul, he was the person that would like take my maths study CDs and like make copies of them, because those CDs were really expensive, like, and where I grew up, nobody can afford those. So my dad would just copy them and like just disseminate them to the community. And I'd be like, Dad, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. And he'd be like, sometimes you gotta do things, you know, to disseminate this. But my dad would always make me like help people, or always tell me to like pass knowledge on. I remember I started studying psychology and sociology, and I think and my dad just would be like, what did you learn today? Like, tell me about some of the theories. And he'd take a pen and paper and start writing them down. I'd kind of feel like a professor just talking to my dad, being like, yeah, so basically the theory on it. And like, for me, it was important to, I think from that, like looking back, especially now and where I am or where I found myself, like, I think my father and my mother made me appreciate how important education is and how powerful education is. And I guess how, like, something that is so pivotal to everything that you do, and then essentially the person that you become in the world, being completely inaccessible to me is insane. And so I guess for me, I grew up with like parents who like embedded academia into me, and I guess now looking back, I'm appreciative for that, and I realize what it did for me and the person it made me become. And also, but like, also I see, because I've been a Muslim woman who's gone through this system, and who has really suffered and struggled to succeed in this in our education system, whether it was teachers who told me that like, maybe you shouldn't apply for this university, you know, or are you sure you want to do an accounting and finance? I don't know if that's something that you would be pictured in. And I think for me, like, looking back now, I see like how almost every step of the way, like, I was, I guess, either like a barrier was thrown in front of me, or like I was like pulled back, I was stopped. And I think for me, it's incredibly important, especially as a I guess as a person who has a platform now, to be able to, I guess, invoke or like embody change, to really make sure that I do something about that, and I guess speak out on platforms and where I can speak out and change, and where I can change. But for me, like, I think that journey, which is so incredibly important and it starts at a very, very young age, like is like, I mean, you mentioned like the climate justice work, and I think for me, like, it took me a couple of years to really understand how like systematic oppression is all linked, like across the board, regardless of like what issue that you want to talk about, regardless of like what it is that like completely pisses you off when you hear about it, right? It's always linked to like one thing. It's linked to capitalism, right? Like, that's like the root of the issue. And so like right now, people are protesting all around the world for Black Lives Matter. But the reality is, it's so much bigger than Black Lives Matter. It's systematic pain and struggling that has existed for decades and decades and decades. And like it's campaigning, it's protest, it's cries, and campaigning that's existed since before civil rights movement, since before so I think for me it's a, I guess, a painful thing in terms of like, and it all roots back to like our education system, right? It all roots back to like what we know, what we learn, and how we make change. For me, like I think university, schools, and I guess and wider society are all a like reflection of like what you know, what you've seen, like you're a product of your own environment. And so the only way we can unlearn and unpick the things that we learn from our environment, from our society, it has to start at a very young age, right? So like, I mean, I'm involved with a campaign that I launched with some youth climate strikers as a part of my work with students organized sustainability. And that campaign is about Teach the Future. It's about embedding environmentalism into the very root of the work that we do. But it's actually just, for me, it's like one step in to really dismantling our education system and understanding how what you teach a child from a very young age and what becomes normalized to them at that age is what they will go on to become, regardless of anything else around them. So I think for me, like, I guess it means, it means a lot. Like I guess for me, it's a very personal journey, and for me, it's very I think it's been difficult, and for me, like being able to look back, and it's I guess so recently as well, and know that I've really had some very difficult times in universities and in my college, and how those institutions reacted to me compared to my white colleagues. I think for me it's been difficult. So I think for me, I feel like I have a duty to be able to use the platform and the power that I have now to be able to invoke the change that I can.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing so many sort of personal anecdotes. I think your dad sounds absolutely fantastic. He should be everyone's dad. It's made the world a better place, like completely overnight. And I think you made some absolutely fantastic points. And I think one of the things that people forget is that by turning education into a product to be sold, you fundamentally undermine not only people's right to education, but also what they're educated about. You know, by keeping our institutions, our universities, our colleges, our schools even in private hands, by making it about money, about profit, we change the texture, the nature of education as a whole. And things like, you know, getting things into the curriculum, changing curriculums, you know, ensuring that people from all backgrounds are properly represented in those institutions, staffing, etc. Like, it limits our ability to change that, and it's part of the reason why it all needs to just be, you know, thrown out, burn it down, as you say, and start again, because there's historic issues of education, and they're certainly not going to get any better by, you know, turning it into a market, turning it into something that is bought and sold and that limits people's access even more. But for different reasons, you know, there's always, even when education was free in this country, there were other barriers to access. So it's completely right that it's not, money isn't the only problem. But thanks so much for that. Could you maybe give us a bit of insight into what you think, you touched on this probably a bit already, but what some of the key issues are in post-16 education at the moment, and maybe some suggestions for things that we can do about them?
Yeah, sure. So I think some key issues. Where do we start with that? I guess I think let's start at like universities and colleges have an unsustainable funding model, right? And so which actually makes no sense, because nobody really wins from it, right? So actually, like, often we speak about universities like essentially making money from students and students being out of pocket, which is true. However, actually universities in their entirety haven't actually like been, because I think what I think is important to recognize is that all that's happened is the money that were paid from the government has transferred onto the student as debt, right? So actually universities are not getting paid any more than what they would be getting when education was free. So I think it's important to recognize that, because often like we're told the universities are really the bad guys, when actually it's the government that's placing that blame on universities. The other thing that universities have done, the government, sorry, has done, is made universities autonomous and set up and got rid of the regulatory body, right? And it set up OFS. Now OFS, which is supposed to be the regulatory body, doesn't really regulate anything. And I think that's really important to know, because as an elected officer that works with the OFS, often we hear university autonomous and we can't tell them what to do, when actually when they were set up to do exactly that. So universities are actually now not really regulated, and I think that's another important thing to recognize. And so like they've kind of been, so yeah, they've been pitted against. So what's happened is, and I think this is like the really like, oh, what's the word for it? This is a very popular tactic actually, like to set us against each other when actually none of us are the problem, right? Which is a tactic the government have done quite well. So for years, like we've kind of like, universities have been like, we've been to universities, you're ripping us off, and universities have been like trying to get students, because they've been put in a situation where they have to operate like a business, because they're either that or they don't make their ends meet. And now, of course, I'm not referring to those universities who are essentially like who are making more money from research funding than they are from any of the money that's coming in from students. But I think that's important to recognize those are very, very small minority of universities, and actually most universities, especially those who have the highest students from like wide and post-social backgrounds, are those universities that are literally every single year like are trying to make ends meet on like just balancing the book. So even though universities are evil and your vice chancellors are definitely evil, they aren't actually the problem, right? The government is the problem. And so I think for me, like one of the key things is to recognize where the problem actually lies, right? And so then can you like start to unpick in the issues and how they're tackled. So I think recognizing that in our education system, like as I think when we talk about like quality of education, right? You can't give quality education on a shoestring budget, right? So actually the reason I guess point out to becoming the defenders of university all of a sudden, I apologize, but the reason like universities and colleges can't give you that qualification or like that quality of education that we deserve is because they're now operating on smaller budgets of money, because they need to attract other students, and therefore the money that would be going towards your academics, and that's a completely different thing that we're going to come on to, the money that we're going to your academics is now going on to a ad on the bloody supermarket. Like, for what reason, right? It's not doing anything for you, but for that university, if they don't do that, they might not be able to attain some students or attract students, because they know the university down the road is doing the exact same thing. So I think that's a huge issue. But also coming back to like your academics. Never in my life have I ever thought about like education, academics in universities, right, and in colleges being paid less than what I would be getting paid working at a shop down the road, right? And I think people I don't think anyone really realizes how many of our academics are on casualized contracts, right? It's insane. Like for me, I remember like going back to my university, I did it as a part of like, I guess, to prove a point. And I wanted to see how many of my academics in the school that I studied in actually were on casualized contracts. And it was way more than I ever feel like I imagined, you know. I thought to myself, maybe 3 or 4 of them, you know, they've been with the university for years. Like, why would they be on casual contracts? And I think and I'm not here to defend universities. Like, I think the universities have a duty to their staff, and if they are unable to pay their staff and put them on proper contracts, they shouldn't be hiring them in the first place. But I think it was, for me, understanding and realizing, like, the concept behind making these books balanced and trying to keep this university open. So I think that's like some of the key issues in terms of like what that exists on universities, and that have I guess like led to other issues. But I think in terms of there's loads of things coming to my head. Like I could talk about accommodation, I could talk about like, do you know what I mean? Like there's and student debt. But I think for us, like as young people, I think it's important to recognize, first of all, identify what I guess makes you angry. Because I think for me, one of the things that I found very useful when I've had like I've worked with activists and organizers is not to tell them what to organize in or to do, just to be like, what really pisses you off, okay? And then let's put together a strategy and a plan of how to tackle that, right? What do you need to do to be able to tackle those issues, right? So like for me, I've never lived in student accommodations, right? But I've worked as a president of a students' union, and I know the issues that exist in those accommodations and how they're exploited and those are like student accommodations owned by universities. Like I can't even start the conversation in terms of like private landlords and how they exploit students. But I think for me, it's important to first recognize like what is it that really angers you, and then like actually like work with your students' union or work with some type of like society in your students' union, in terms of like coming together and organizing and making some change. And often like you just need, like for me, I guess you need to have like you need one person to start a conversation for people to join in. That's how you start movements. Movements start with one person. And so I think for me, it's incredibly important to recognize what issue that exists in your institution or you would like to tackle yourself, and then do something about it. So yeah, and I think, and I would love to like be a part of those conversations if you ever need somebody to like bounce ideas off, or like or I mean, being the national president, I do have a contact to every single union in the country, which is pretty great. So yeah, I could probably like link you up with somebody. So would love to do that. Let's start a revolution.
That's very brilliant advice and a very generous offer. Thank you. We'll hold you to that. But yeah, fantastic advice. I think that, you know, and I think one of the things that Young Greens is going to do soon on that subject is to hold a policy workshop where basically we just ask people what pisses them off and what we should do about it. So I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Love that. Yes.
Apply to every circumstances.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move on, if that's all right, to questions from the audience. So people, if you have questions, send them in if you haven't already. Me and Katrina are going to do some kind of like question dance so that you don't just have to listen to my voice. But I'll ask the first one. We just had something coming from Ella. She asks, how can we campaign to decolonize the curriculum?
Okay, so I think first of all, I think it's incredibly important to work with academics. First, so when I like a lot of there's a lot of resources available actually, like NUS to produce a lot of like work in terms of like how to put a campaign together, a reading list, etc. But I think it really starts with like why we're at where we are anyways. It starts with education. It starts with being able to simply being able to explain why we need to decolonize the education system, right? Because I think often like buzzwords are thrown around and it's like, let's decolonize our education system, here's a reading list, and that's about it. And like to me, that's not solving the problem. Like adding a few black and brown names to a reading list isn't decolonizing education. So I think it's important, first of all, to if you want to start a campaign on your campus, you contact the right people, or you research and find some resources and packs that exist already, on how and speak to a different institution or union or campaign that have already done that or started that campaign. For example, University of Manchester, who have started that campaign, and their new officer has done a lot of work around like working with a university very closely to through actually the race equity charter, which I absolutely hate, by the way, but like to actually like decolonize parts of the curriculum, and they've put together like loads of teachings as a part of that. They put together loads of resources. So I think like it's always good to start by contacting others and learning how it's been done elsewise, and like learning from their mistakes that they made, so you don't make those mistakes either. And make sure you don't fall into the trap of doing stuff that are performative and just look great, where the union or university can be like, look what we've done, but actually there's been no commitment to real change.
Cool, thanks very much. That was great. I'm going to throw back to me and hopefully my functional internet for the next question, which is, can you talk a bit about how you see like apprenticeships and other like non-university education fitting within that National Education Service?
Yeah, 100%. I think, interestingly enough, like I had an interesting conversation with the head of our student apprentice. So NUS set up a National Society of Apprenticeship, which is basically student apprenticeships, apprentices who weren't ever really represented because they didn't really fit into students, but they were students, and so we set that up. And so I recently had a meeting with them, and it wasn't recent. I keep saying recent. Why does it feel like recent? It was about a year ago when I was starting my role, and I had a conversation with them about, and it was because we were building a national education service. And like for me, I thought, how do we fit them in? And when I was talking about the national education service, I realized we didn't need to fit them in, right? Because they are a part of the National Education Service. They are a part of a fully funded, accessible education system, because that's what they do. They're retaining education through the means and their providers. And I think for me, that was really important to actually realize that one of the things I've always been uncomfortable with telling like young people to do is to go and do an apprenticeship, because of how badly paid they are, because of how essentially unregulated, unprotected they are. Like so many students, when I forgot the name of the company collapsed, they lost their apprentice overnight. These are like students who put in like 2 years and worked basically slave labor, and have and then just lost it overnight. And I think, had that been in a university, even though the situation isn't great, but had that been a university, those students would have been protected, right? Those students would have been instantly given back the cost and the money that they paid. And for me, there's so much work that needs to happen in terms of making sure that apprentices are fully paid on our and are trained well and are protected when they go into these workspaces, and are not, not put in those situations. But I think for me, in terms of like how they fit into the National Education Service, like it fits right in. Like, it's at the end of the day, they are attaining education, and their education needs to be accessible, needs to be fully funded, and it needs to be lifelong. So I think it really fits into the vision of reimagining a 21st century education system.
Thank you. It's great. Really comprehensive. This one's from Josh. To what extent should political education feature in the curriculum? And at what age do you think it should be introduced to students?
So I think political education is key. And I think it's important for our education system to, I guess, make us critical thinkers, right? And for us to be able to understand, and because I think right now, I think our education system makes us passive learners, and like just to go through the system. And often, like any change makers that you meet, it isn't the education system that made them that. It is something that's happened outside of the education system. And I think for me, education system plays a massive part in allowing you and giving you the tools to be able to digest and interpret everything that's happening around you. And I think for me, like when people talk about political education, they like worry. They're like, oh my God, they're going to teach like labor values or we values. So like, like, no, that's not really what it is, right? It's giving young people the tools to be able to disseminate and understand what's happening around them or why things are happening around them. That's political education. Like, we're not indoctrinating someone to choose a political party from a young age, right? And so, like, for me, I think political education should play a huge part from a very, very young age. And it isn't done by like backing on the curriculum, like political education into like as a part of like between maths and science, it's done through like everything that you do, right? Like it's done through the lessons in which you learn and how you learn them, right? And so for me, like the context of like, for example, like how many of us learned about like colonization and the impacts that that the UK, the British Empire, had on the rest of the world, right? Not many of us really know that. And I think those are incredibly important context to understand and to know, especially living and profiting and I guess like basically like enjoying the privileges of the empire, right? Like I think it's important for all of us to know what this country was built on. And so like for me, political education, it starts at a very young age, starts at a very early age, and it's something that is just dripped into everything and anything that we do.
Fab, thank you. That's very like inspiring as well. I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions before we finish, because I know we did start a bit late, so I reckon we can squeeze a couple in. Raphael has asked about how can we kind of persuade people of the value of the student union, and particularly around the idea of giving kind of staff information that students can really make decisions for themselves and are capable of organising and having value in that organisation.
So in terms of like, do you mean like being involved in your students' union?
Yeah, so
like
kind of persuading the university that they should have a students' union and what the value of that students' union is.
Okay, yeah. So I think first of all, like, okay, I guess I don't need to explain to you guys why student unions are so important, because you asked that question. But I think for me, one of the things that is very useful, because I've helped some colleges especially set up student unions, is finding student unions locally, or not just locally actually, but like finding similar institutions to yourselves, right? For example, if you're a college of like 10,000 students, or if you're a college of 3,000 students, like finding a college that also have 3,000 students where and like where we can like contact you with. So like actually like the NUS website might be very useful for you. Like NUS website has every college and every union, every students union on there, so every college would be listed as well. So flicking through that, like if you recognize an area, like being able to contact them, and we will be able to give you contact details. But important to like find an institution locally and be like, how did you set up, and getting some ideas in terms of like a student union is useful because it will allow us to be able to engage with students better. It will allow all those things that universities and colleges love, right? Like the whole thing of like, you'll be engaged with better students, and like you'll bring students together, you'll have societies, you'll have sports, all of this like exciting stuff that brings students to campus, that brings students to a space. And I think when setting up a students union, like just give them that like really soft, fluffy language of like bringing students together, student engagement, student experience. But of course, like once you've set up, hit them with all the issues, because that's what we exist to do. But I think like student unions are like really powerful spaces. So NUS also has like a resource in terms of like, we offer support to any universities or colleges that don't have student unions. So that I think that's a shout. Like you should definitely contact us and be like, I want to set this up. How can I go about it? And we'll be somebody from the team who is probably like well versed than I am, would be able to give you some solid advice.
Thanks for that, Zamzam. I should add that if the institution is based in the UK, your further education institutions have a legal right to set up a students' union. So particularly if you're, even if it is a private institution, if it has degree awarding powers, legally you have an entitlement to be represented by a students' union. So yeah, everything that Zamzam said was a bang on. And if you're worried about your institution not having a students' union, maybe message me and I will give you some advice. I'm just going to do one last question before we close off. Thanks so much for sticking with us, everyone, and some great questions as well. So Zamzam, final question for you. What tactics do you see as central to the campaign for a national education service? And what do you think we need to do to sort of organise and mobilise behind demands as radical as these? And what does our power as students look like?
Okay. I think what's incredibly important is for students to, for me, like I always talk about this, and I think students need to realize how powerful they are in space, in university, in the education space, right? Without students, those spaces aren't needed. And so for me, like that is incredibly important to realize, like that change can only happen when we take charge as young people. And so recognizing that, for me, the fight for a free and fully funded education is really keeping the messaging simple, right? Making it clear, because when you do that, you make it accessible to anybody and everybody to join, right? Like there's a reason that Twitter is down to 140 characters and things go viral, right? It's like you read it, it's quick, you get it, right? And for me, like that's incredibly important to realize that the messaging in terms of like building a campaign needs to be simple, it needs to be clear, right? Education is a public good. That is a simple and clear message, right? And I think it will take us constantly hammering that in for it to become norm, right? Because that's really the first leap, right? Because once you've like had that leap, you can now have a conversation about what it would look like. You can't talk about what it would look like when not everybody's on. I mean, you don't really need everybody on board, but you do need a large majority on board, because for us, I think to be able to win a national education service, it's going to take a lot of organising and take a lot of political organising, because there are only two political parties that believe in this vision, right? Like, and that is like they're all like everything else. We know full well that they don't have, like a lot of these political parties don't have students in mind. It's why, like NUS a couple of years ago around the Lie Lie campaign, when the Lib Dems sold us out, right? And so like I think for me as students, we should always be comfortable to be in place, like in a place to call politicians out, but also call political parties out, because when you at them, and like one of the really interesting things that I've learned is that like when loads of students and young people at politicians, they freak out, they panic, and I actually love it, because like whenever I've had any issues, like I just mobilized a bunch of like student unions to contact their MPs, and like next thing you know, they're like setting up meetings and they're replying to letters that we've sent. So I think like students really need to recognize that we dominate in certain spaces, and we know how to organize better and more efficiently than ever before, and we should really utilize those spaces. We should really like be comfortable to be able to hold people to account on what they've said and when they're going to do it. And I think the only way we're going to win this campaign is really sticking to it and understanding that it goes beyond, like it goes beyond your 3 years at university. It goes beyond your 2 years in college. It goes beyond your apprenticeship. Like it's a vision for the greater good, right? And so it's work that will continue on way past when we leave these spaces. It's work that's going to continue on, that I'm going to champion hopefully and continue campaigning on way after I've left my post at NUS. And I think for me, like that's the most important part, like recognizing that this is a long haul fight. Like we're in this for we're in it for the long run, right? And being able to, I guess, like buckle up and like be ready for that journey, and to understand like at different parts of your life the role that you play in that journey, and like what you're going to do when you leave university, what you're going to do when you're working, what you're going to do when you are when you're a parent. Like I think like it's really important to recognize that like you're a part of this journey, and like if you believe in this vision, then make sure that you are front facing and a part of that journey and pushing it forward, regardless of like what position I guess life puts you in. So for me, like I think that's how we win this. I think that's how we I guess push this forward, because there will come a time where we are the majority of the voting population, and we will be able to elect a progressive and I guess a government that has the thoughts of students and young people in mind. So I think that's an incredibly important thing to recognise.
Thank you so much. I think that's really powerful. as well, to say that you shouldn't just care about student and young people's lives and issues and voices and listening to them when you yourself are young. Those of us towards the older end of the young green spectrum, there's a few of us who are nearly 30, and it's been a while since we went to uni, being honest, but you know, I think what we try to do is continue that fight on, and we hope to, you know, educate and inspire people to continue that fight throughout their lives. So thank you so much for saying that. I think it really needs to be heard. You know, so many people think that, like, oh, well, I didn't go to uni, so it didn't affect me, or went to uni 40 years ago, so I don't care about it now. But it has such a wider impact on everyone in society, and we should care about it, and we should be pissed off about it as well. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm not going to ask any more questions, but I am just going to hand over to Katrina to do the sort of goodbye.
I am. So yeah, massive thanks again to Zamzam and for everyone for all your questions as well. It's really nice to see them all coming in and everything. I'm going to put a few more links in the chat, as we always do at the end. The first one will be not quite the same as the one at the beginning, because I spelt that one wrong. So this time I'm going to put the right link in the chat. If you are able to give us £2 a month, we'd be very grateful for that. But I won't dwell on it for too much longer, because well, you've heard it 3 times now as my internet died. We have coming up on the 16th of June, in a couple of weeks, we will be inviting the Green Party Deputy Leader, Amelia Womack, to come and speak with us about ending austerity. So although a lot of the people in power don't openly talk about austerity anymore, it has not gone away. And, you know, it's done incalculable, that's a difficult word to say, incalculable damage to, you know, youth services, to health services, to education, to a lot of people's quality of life. So Amelia's going to come and talk to us about how we can, you know, fight to end austerity in a really practical sense. And then the last thing, oh no, I do have one more thing, sorry. Those of you who are members, who are Young Green members, you might know that around now we were supposed to be running our convention and our AGM. There's this pandemic thing that happened, I don't know if you've heard of it, slightly put our plans awry. We are working on that at the moment, so please do keep your eyes peeled. Because we're going to be telling you about how we're going to kind of do that digitally soon. We're working very, very hard on it. And now this is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to give you our click to tweet, which is what we do when we put words in your mouth, as Rosie always says when she does it. So if you click the link that I am posting now, it'll open up a pre-filled tweet. You can edit it or whatever, but it just says, I've been to this talk with Zamzam, it was great. And then it will send you a link to sign up to the next one. So all that remains now is for me to thank Zamzam again, and for all of you for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you next time. I'll give you a nice Zoom round of applause. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was great. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zamzam.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.